Two outside advisors to President Trump giving an inside look at how the president's enemies in and out of the White House are working against him and his agenda.
Former Trump campaign managers Corey Lewandowski and David Bossie are co-authors of Trump's Enemies, How the Deep State is Undermining the Presidency, and they join us now. Thanks for being here, guys.
Good morning. Thanks for having us.
So you talk about Trump's enemies. Now, there's three groups, basically. There's the media, there's the left, and then there's within the administration. Was there anyone from within the administration on the enemies list that was surprising to you that came up?
Well, look, I think really the book is about a couple things. The first is the intelligence community's assault on the Trump campaign prior to him running and what they did to spy on American citizens. And if Donald Trump wouldn't have won, we'd know nothing about it. And we talk about Comey and Clapper and Brennan and all the things that they did to abuse their power as law enforcement officers to go after American citizens. That's the first part of the
And you say that President Trump knows that President Obama knew they were spying.
Well, we asked the president, do you think that President Obama knew what was going on, this quote-unquote insurance policy? And his answer, and look, we're the only book in the first 2 years of his administration he sat down and gave an on-the-record interview for, and he said, yes, I think he knew. And that is a devastating statement when you think about it. The highest levels of our government knew that political opponents were being spied on for political reasons only. This doesn't happen in the United States, and the Obama administration not only knew it, they were complicit in it.
And with some of the people we know about, we've seen the texts. We saw the Peter Strzok. We saw the Lisa Page. But we don't know for sure what Brennan, Comey, and what President Obama knew. There's just some conclusions and theories.
There are, and we dive deep into that, and I think people will learn a lot from the book as far as the intelligence side is concerned. The president in the interview goes on to talk about how the FBI, Strzok and Page in particular, through the text messages, talk about how they leaked information to the media, then use those very stories that the media placed to go and expand their investigation or go to the FISA court. It is so unethical. It's against the fabric of what the FBI is about.
Well, you do a good job talking about the deep state, the permanent government in Washington that does not like this president. But it's kind of sad that he has surrounded himself at times with members of, I think you refer to them as the November 9th Club, these people who are nodding, yes, I'm going to help you. But in their heart of hearts, they're never Trumpers. They just want a job.
Well, Steve, what we saw, and look, previous administrations have brought in rivals from other campaigns. I look at Jim Baker, who I think is one of the premier chiefs of staff ever to serve in that capacity. He was with one of his opponents before he came in and became the chief of staff. The difference here is when Donald Trump brought these people in who didn't support him during the campaign, didn't vote for him on Election Day, they kept their own agenda, and their agenda was not the president's agenda. Whether if you believe Bob Woodward's desk, where they were taking documents off of the Resolute desk so that he wasn't signing them, or they used bureaucracy to slow down.
People?
Look, Gary Cohn is a prime example. He served as the National Economic Advisor. Rob Porter is the staff secretary. Sean Spicer. And the good news is, when Donald Trump came to Washington, okay, he didn't know anybody. He knows everybody now, and he's replaced those people with individuals who are on his team, and he's being much more successful.
But, Corey, the three people you just listed, they did support the president.
They didn't support the president. Look, they did not
They did
vote.
in public.
Well, of course, in public they did, but behind the scenes what they were doing is they were subverting his agenda, and that's the most disappointing part. It's a privilege and an honor to serve inside an administration and to use your own desire to thwart the will of the 60 million people who voted for a president is shameful.
Dave, you talk about being on the plane with the president one of the most tense times. The day Paul Manafort cuts a deal and Michael Cohen cuts a deal, and you walk on Air Force One and there's a sense of quiet and Fox News is on and he gets off and does his rally. He gets calmest when things get the tensest.
You know, it's amazing. I watched him throughout the campaign, throughout the transition, and now over the last 2 years of his presidency. He is the biggest game time player I've ever seen. He is so committed to his America First agenda. He's so focused on his agenda that he doesn't let the little things get to him. And that's what the American people really need to understand is this president is totally focused on them and doing the right thing for America
but a lot's
every
out
single
of his
day.
Control with the whole Mueller.
No, it is, and that's why he doesn't let it. He understands I can't control what these guys are doing out there. I'm just going to make sure I educate the American people about the fake news confuse divisions, and that's what we go into that in the book as well. What he is up against, the 90% of the news that's negative every single day, day in and day out. By the way, since he was a candidate, all throughout the transition, there's a vast left-wing conspiracy out there against this president, whether it's the media, members of Congress in both parties, and the intelligence community. He has a conspiracy against him across the board. There's no question about that.
And we're just going to see how your relationship survives a second book tour. You two. That's going to be the other story.
There'll be a new book called Trump's Enemies, Corey and David. Enemies of each other.
Bestseller.
Corey, David, thank you very much. Good luck.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.